Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on what part of the world you're in. I'm Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay College. This breakfast, our monthly roundtable, is our 284th event that's co-sponsored by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Delighted that all of you could join us this morning for this amazing presentation and conversation that we will have with Damali, who we were talking about earlier in the pre-waiting room session. Damali and I now go back over a decade, and it's so great to have you with us, Damali, this morning to share your thoughts and to engage all of us. Before Nikki introduces her, I want to thank all of the co-facilitators of this breakfast: Matthew Latimer, Nikki Borofsky, Sherston Pugh, and Chloe Choi. Without their assistance each month, it would be really hard to pull this off. Many of you have asked us whether we will be going back in person. Between 9/11 and March 2020, we always met in person at John Jay. Since April 2020, we've been meeting online. We have now had one in-person event, and we are hopefully going to try to do another in-person event in May. Until then, and after then, we will continue to do these online. Next month, we will have with us Carl Smallwood, from Ohio State Law School, who has been working on the Divided Community Project. So we know that, yes, indeed, we will be continuing online. Without any further ado, I should say that this session is being recorded, although I don't see the recording. Oh, there it is being recorded, and the recordings are posted online. I was reminded by someone who views these online that you can search YouTube and just search New York City Dispute Resolution Roundtable breakfast, and all of the breakfasts that we've been recording pop up. They're also posted on the ACR-GNY website and the CUNY DRC's website. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki Borofsky, who is going to introduce our amazing speaker, Damali Peterman. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you, Maria. So I'm kind of all about ado because there's a lot of you that need to know Damali if you don't already. So greetings. Thank you again for joining us. It is an absolute privilege and honor to welcome you all to today's Breakfast Roundtable, where we have the opportunity to hear from my friend. I have to be disclose my bias, my friend, and one of really the most brilliant and influential figures in the field of conflict resolution today. Damali is a lawyer, a mediator, an arbitrator, an ombuds, an educator. She has more than 2 decades of experience helping people and organizations navigate conflict, build bridges, and achieve real solutions. She is the founder and CEO of Breakthrough ADR. She's also the founder and CEO of her former law firm. She's created many companies. She's done many things, but Breakthrough really is redefining how negotiation and dispute resolution are approached in boardrooms, in workplaces, in communities across the globe, and truly across the globe. I don't know if she's been to Antarctica, but if there's some penguins fighting, she could be there next year. She is also, I'm happy to say, a distinguished neutral with JAMS, where I used to work, and I was so happy that she came on board while I was still there, where she handles complex disputes at the highest level of commercial and employment, and all kinds of different subjects with skill and insight and just a lot of talent. Beyond her work as a practitioner, she is a sought-after teacher and educator and thought leader. She teaches at Howard University Law School. I've been one of her volunteers in a mediation clinic with her students there, and it's just fabulous, the work that she does and the way that she's helping to shape the minds of tomorrow. She is also serving on the President's Leadership Council for Search for Common Ground, which is a huge peace-building international organization that regularly advises on global conflict resolution efforts. And if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of that going on. We need her now more than ever. She's featured in a ton of magazines, Forbes, Essence, Fast Company, Rolling Stone, across major news networks. You turn on the TV and you're likely to see her breaking down something that we all experience, and really doing what we have always wanted to do, breaking that echo chamber and speaking about dispute resolution beyond the people that just attend these sessions regularly, telling somebody how to avoid conflict at a wedding, what to do at a turkey dinner where there's going to be a lot of relatives who have very different views. So she's doing that, and now culminating this experience and distilling it, she has brought her expertise and vision. And I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but it's really important that everybody get hyped up for her best-selling book, Negotiating While Black, Be Who You Are and Get What You Want. And I have it right here. Woo, the hardcover edition. It's great. I've read it. And since I first met Damali at a New York Peace Institute fundraiser, I saw that she is who she is and she gets what she wants. So this is a very authentic book. It's truly life-shifting, and it feels like having a conversation with a good friend. It's well written. It's the kind of person who sees you, understands you, and gives you the kind of guidance that actually sticks. It's based on the vast history of research and negotiation theory that many of us are familiar with, but it just distills it into really easy to follow, easy to remember toolkits that can be helpful for everybody. It focuses on authenticity, identity, inclusiveness as being powerful tools, not just obstacles in negotiation. And it kind of explains why, if you're not part of the pantheon of historical tactics in negotiation, older, whiter, more male, more cisgender, why and how, why the typical recipe might not work for you, and how you can actually make a recipe that does work for your negotiation with your own spices that can be incredibly delicious. So we're going to kind of gear into a bit of a fireside chat or a snowstorm chat with her. I've got some questions to ask her, and I encourage everybody to ask your questions, raise your virtual hand, pop them in the chat. We will feed them, and then maybe towards the end, we'll open up the floor for a more kind of informal opportunity for you to ask your questions live. But I want to give Damali the chance to really get to speak about her her book and her experience. So Damali, thank you so much for coming. I'd love to give you just an opportunity to introduce yourself if you like, and then we'll launch into a bit of a chit chat.
Nikki, I don't think I have anything left to say. That was the most amazing introduction I think I've ever received. I'm going to fire all my publicists and just have you introduce me everywhere I go. I think we can all agree that that was just wonderful, and you are always extraordinary. I like to start by first thanking everyone for joining us today, and in particular, thanking ACRGNY, John Jay, and the incomparable Maria Volpe, who has been such a role model and leader in our field of conflict resolution. I don't think I know anyone who doesn't know Maria Volpe, no matter where I am. If I'm in Washington, D.C., where I'm from, I can see a lot of people here from all over. And for Bill, who's from Cork, Ireland. That was the first place I went to in Ireland, actually, and I'm a big fan of Cork. And we'll talk later as to whether or not I kissed the Blarney Stone when I was there, down there. We'll talk about that later. But what I'd like to say also is thank you to Nikki, who's just been extraordinary. And I think the part that she left out is that I'm not even sure if I would be at JAMS today if it wasn't for Nikki. So I just want to mention that it wasn't just happenstance that I was there when she was there, but she was one of the main reasons that I wanted to be there, because she's just extraordinary, also a thought leader. And I could probably say everything that she said about me applies to her, except for maybe she doesn't have a book just yet, but I suspect one is in the works. She has a lot of great ideas. And so I just want to thank everyone again for being here. I'm really looking forward to this dialogue. As Nikki mentioned, feel free to put your questions into the chat. We'll be discussion, but this is really time for us to connect. And I can see we have quite a few people on the virtual in the virtual roundtable today. So let's get started, Nikki.
Excellent. Thank you. And really, there are so many luminaries in the audience, and that's always the case with this group. So please feel free to pop your questions into the chat or, direct message us. We're going to be kind of multitasking to get everything done. We're going to kind of start, I think, to launch a poll a little bit. There'll be some little interactive aspects to get you all kind of figure out kind of who's in the audience and what's going on. So they'll be popping up and feel free to kind of answer them as you can. I'll leave it up for a little while, and then we'll be able to reflect a little bit more and adjust our conversation to who's in the room and what you're interested in. But just as a foundational question, your approach and the subtitle of the book is about being who you are to get what you want. Can you talk a little bit about why authenticity is so important in the negotiation realm?
I really love this question, Nikki, because to me, the only constant in every negotiation is you, the person who's negotiating, right? So the facts, the people, the topic could shift, but you are going to be in that negotiation. And in my opinion, too often we're taught to adopt someone else's negotiation style, but that's a losing game to me because how can you be like someone else and still be successful? The most successful negotiators know who they are, they know what they bring to the table, and they know how to leverage their natural strengths. And so, me trying to be like X person isn't going to deliver, first of all, the same results as that person because we're not the same. So, I really believe that authenticity builds trust. It builds confidence and credibility. And when people sense that you're being genuine and consistent, they're more likely to engage, respect your position, and help work towards a resolution. So to me, sometimes when you can't put your finger on what's going wrong or how come you're not getting the same results consistently, one question to ask yourself is if you are being your authentic self and if you are showing up as yourself consistently.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you really illustrate in the book with stories that we can all relate to. So many of us have read the kind of canon of negotiation books, getting to yes, getting past no. And it really has been formulated as this list of follow steps A, B, and C. And then when you are a confident global mediator and try to buy a car and it doesn't, the script doesn't work for you, it can be super frustrating. And I think your book, investigates why that happens and leans into solutions for how you can be more authentic. Can you talk a little bit about the pressure to kind of conform, maybe in that kind of a situation, if you're in a high level commercial billions of dollars at stake environment, or if you're in a culture that's completely different, how can you stay true to yourself while still being strategic?
Excellent question. And what I will also say for Cynthia, who asked if I'm lumping mediation and negotiation together, to me, mediation just facilitated negotiations. So people who are in mediation are trying to negotiate towards some result, and a mediator is there to facilitate those negotiations. So I think that there, of course, there's a distinction between mediation and negotiation, but mediations include many, M-A-N-Y, many, M-I-N-I negotiations. So your question asked me about whether people feel the pressure to conform or code switch in negotiations. And I think what's really important is that, I say authenticity a lot, and I don't mean that authenticity means being able to just say whatever you want and do whatever you want at any time. Staying true to yourself doesn't mean refusing to adapt. It means being intentional about how you show up. And here are a few ways you can strike that balance because, this conversation that we're having, Nikki, it's talking about some highlights from my book, but it's also hopefully will impart some tips to people who are here today. And so for me, a few ways to strike the balance. and being intentional with how you show up is one, knowing your non-negotiables. So what parts of your identity or values are essential to maintain? And we all have different aspects of our identity. So, I'm a mom, I'm a big sister, I'm an attorney, I'm an athlete, I'm all these different things. And so what is important for me, what's a part of my identity that no matter what, I want that to be a part of my story, right? And so for me, it's really important to know that there's some things about my identity that are non-negotiable, not to mention there are things that people can visibly see about my identity, and that may be informing the way that they see me. And maybe I don't want to only be seen that way at the moment, right? Maybe I want to be seen in another way. Maybe I want to be considered to be, today, the best professor of this, as opposed to, just being an author. So every day, all day, I'm deciding for myself which part of my identity I want to lead, and I know what is non-negotiable for me in that moment. Another tip is to just recognize the room, right? So just kind of know your audience. Adapting doesn't mean losing yourself. It means making strategic choices about how you present information. Oftentimes, when we're preparing to have a conversation, we're thinking about what we're going to say, not always thinking about how the audience will receive the information. And so crafting your message to that audience and thinking about, okay, how will this be best received, right? I can deliver the same message in different ways. So how can I optimize that what I'm trying to impart will be received? And let me tell you, writing a book will teach you that, because you can talk all day, you can go on TV all day and be the expert when it comes to resolving daily problems, when people want to know what you think about things that are happening real time in the news. But having to write a book that is in 75 countries, that people have to basically meet wherever they are. So whatever's going on for you in your life, wherever you are, and you have to be able to work with the information and material, that's a totally different level of thinking about, your audience or recognizing the room. So I just want to say that, even how you show up every day could be different when you're giving someone something that could be the go-to reference for years in a variety of different locales. And the third tip that I would say is something that I call like using authentic power moves, right? Everyone has their superpower, right? What are your superpowers? Know your superpowers. If it's humor, use that. I studied improv at the Upright Citizens Brigade. I think I'm hilarious, right? So I try to go out there and inject some humor. I'm always thinking about the right balance. I don't start with it. I try to figure out, I read the room, what is the right position or what is the right approach to take. But I think it's really important. So whatever your superpower is, if it's humor, if it's patience, if it's being direct, whatever is a part of your natural style, you should lean into it strategically. So just don't change who you are. Fine tune how you show up in different spaces without losing yourself.
And I think that the results of the first poll are in, and I think it integrates a little bit what you've been saying. 74% of the audience ticked the box for mediator, but there's also a ton of arbitrators, lawyers, negotiation trainer, coaches, some ombuds, and some researchers in academia, and then some others that fall outside of that box. And a lot of people, I think, it was not a choose one only. And I think that's also very common in our field, is there's a lot of hats that we can be wearing, and there's a lot of authentic identities that we can bring to the table. And so as you're navigating and finding that superpower, it's going to be different for who you're bringing, what part of you you're bringing, and also what part, what audience you're engaging with. And then just for your knowledge and our collective knowledge, the question about how often do you engage in negotiations, half were daily or weekly, 33% daily and 28% weekly, and then only 8% rarely. So I know if anybody's gone to a swap meet or tried to take a screen away from a child, it's a common experience. I just, since we're encountering negotiations so frequently, what do you find are the biggest barriers that people face when they're trying to negotiate and they're trying to bring their authentic selves to the table, or to the car, or to wherever they find themselves?
I love that question. And I will say, based on the poll results, people think that they negotiate 33% And I would think that that number is a lot higher. And I think that goes to how you define negotiations. And I love what you said, Nikki, in terms of, if you're negotiating with the child about screen time, or if you're going to the swap meet, or basically if you're having an interaction with someone and you are trying to get your point of view across. Sometimes we negotiate with ourselves. I don't know about you, but I woke up this morning and I was like, am I going to go to the gym or not? That was a negotiation I had with myself. And I said, I don't have enough time. I have to be on camera at 7:45. So let me just go ahead and not go to the gym later. But I also won't eat, a donut. I'm going to have some coffee. And there's the humor bit for you. And so in terms of biggest barriers, there's so many barriers that people face when trying to negotiate as their authentic selves. If I had to, Nikki, put it into a few categories, the first, well, and not that they're in order of like one, two, three, but the first thing that comes to mind is fear of judgment. People sometimes worry that they're going to be judged, right, for being their authentic selves. Maybe they think that will hurt their credibility. Maybe they think that because people are not as, because oftentimes in mediations or in negotiations or what have you, they're coming into a space where they may not know all the parties or the people. They're coming into a space where maybe the people don't know them, and so they're just worried about being judged. So that could be a reason. That could be, sorry, I'm just trying to make the poll go off my screen. That could be a reason why people that could be a barrier to people, that they might have a fear of judgment. Something else that comes up a lot that I know we all hear often in discussions that talk about barriers is imposter syndrome, right? And so sometimes people feel as if to be taken seriously or to be credible or to be successful, they have to mimic the traditional negotiator style, right? We've talked about some of the books that already exist that say this is the way that you do it. If you do it this way, you're going to be the best negotiator, and not taking into consideration that, I like what you said earlier, Nikki, about different ingredients, right? So essentially that everyone has different ingredients, and maybe the way that they would be the best negotiator is by tapping into the skills that they have and using their own superpowers. So instead of trying to mimic a traditional negotiator's approach, I want people to trust their own approach, right? And then another barrier, I heard this when I was listening to the chat before I appeared on the screen, but another barrier could be bias and perhaps even underestimation. And so you'll see on the cover of my book that one of the subtitles that I have is a new way to negotiate for anyone who's ever been underestimated. So for people in the room, how many times have you been underestimated, right? Thank you, Nikki, for that visual. So people could, for whatever reason, not take you seriously, and you could you could check the box. It could be because of your age, it could be because of your gender, your race, or other factors. But for whatever the reason is, there's some bias associated with it. People make snap judgments. That's how implicit bias works. And so these are some of the biggest barriers I think people face. And what's most important to me is, of course, knowing some of those barriers and identifying them and being aware, but also recognizing that these barriers exist and developing strategies to counter them, right? We don't want to internalize them as personal flaws, but just be aware that these are some of the barriers that may exist, if they do for you, and how do you kind of overcome them and don't internalize them?
Yeah, that's great. And just when you're talking, it just makes me think of all of the really phenomenal negotiators, mediators, that I know, and having watched them work, how incredibly different they all are. And for me, it really is more like, an assembly of kind of virtuoso musicians in a group that can either be playing rock or classical or whatever kind of music it is. So it's like the negotiation tactic is your skill at that instrument, and then the audience is you're tailoring the kind of music that you appreciate it to. Along those lines, I was wondering if you could just share a little bit with how you kind of found your authenticity and your style. Who did you observe? What classes, what books were most important for you as you are kind of coming into your own and figuring out how to make that the most powerful or a really powerful aspect of what you're able to accomplish in a negotiation?
Well, what I'll say is that before I read a book on negotiations, the first person to tell me to be my authentic self was my mother. When I was a child, my mother told me that I could be whoever I wanted to be. And it was something that always resonated with me. So I never, so as a child growing up in Washington, D.C., my mom always encouraged me to be who, she said, be who you are. And I said, okay. So, so it was something that I always felt comfortable doing. I got that message again, and this is not in my book. When I was in college, there was a resident director. I went to Spelman in Atlanta, Georgia, an amazing, amazing, amazing institution. And there was a resident director. And just imagine like being a freshman, going away for school, and there's so many people who are amazing and wonderful, and you're just trying to find your way, right? Just in general, as being in a new place, new location, all of this. And I remember her just saying, you know, she said her exact words, if I had to quote her, was like, be who you are, because if anyone hates you, they hate you because, you know, they ain't you. And I was like, I love that so much. It was like very short and pithy, but it was so apropos because that's exactly, it made me feel, and it made all of us who heard this speech feel like, you know, even in this situation, you could still be yourself and you don't have to worry about conforming to make friends or to find new groups of people to hang out with, because the way you find your true group is to be your true self, right? And that's how you'll find people who are like you. And so the first sort of first opportunity for me to hear someone say, be who you are, was my mom. I heard that again later in life. And by the way, my grandmother, who hailed from South Carolina, my maternal grandmother, would always say something similar. So there were many women in my life who always said that. And then, of course, going through and having many people, especially women, especially Black women, to see as role models was very helpful. Being able to read books, it was interesting about reading books, because you mentioned what books did I read. What's interesting about reading books is the reason that I wrote a book was because to me, there was never something that was really on point for me. I feel like I had to sort of Frankenstein an approach from reading a little bit of this, a little bit of that, being like, I don't think that would work for me. Or I know that wouldn't work for me because I've tried something similar and it didn't work. And so why am I sort of using other people's playbooks? We need to have a toolkit for negotiating in real life. And I think that that's key, because negotiating in real life every day we have opportunities to negotiate, again, whether we see them as negotiations or not. And every day we have an opportunity to enhance our skills, enhance our techniques. And so, so that was the second thing, basically, the books that I read, I didn't feel like they were capturing what I needed. And then I was teaching negotiations, and people would ask me for additional resources. And I felt like I could promote some of those books. And also, I found myself writing more and giving them more of my thoughts, as in terms of, you know, because people would say, "Oh, I've read those books before," and I didn't feel like I learned enough to help me for, you know, based on the boxes that I checked. And so I would say things like, "Well, here's what I think might work for you." And I found that happening a lot. I found that people were asking me for advice a lot. And so now I try to come up with a toolkit that people can go to first. So, you know, maybe I get less phone calls in the first instance. People get the advice they need. And then in the second instance, or the second phase, then they come to me if they need me to help them as a negotiator or as a neutral third party.
I love that. And for me, you know, when I read the book, it was kind of a culmination of like a chit chat on the subway that we had many, many years ago, where we were both talking about how, oh, you know, it's always the same people at the meetings, and nobody really understands what these great tools are in the kind of negotiating toolbox, the active listening, the understanding how to kind of dig deeper and figure out some of the ninja crazy tools that we were teaching maybe at the New York Peace Institute to police officers, but that's in a context and with a kind of transmission that's easy to get. And I really love that about the book, is that it just boils down this kind of history and canon into stories and tactics that are really usable. Um, in that sense, you know, you talk about something that's you call the $1 million need. I feel almost like it's like an Austin Powers thing. Like it should be like the $1 trillion need now. But can you talk about that in the context of knowing what you want versus knowing what you need and how that influences how you approach a negotiation?
Certainly. So the $1 million need is essentially, to me, the need that drives all other needs, right? So oftentimes mediators, negotiators, we know to separate positions from interests, right? So wants from needs. But sometimes there's a need that's sort of driving driving all other needs. And that may be easily identifiable. Sometimes people can articulate it. Oftentimes they're telling you a whole list of needs. And so you just sort of have to figure out what's the need that's driving all other needs. For example, if someone says that they want a raise and they want, say they want a $10,000 raise, they might tell you that they want to buy a new vehicle, or they want to pay for the kids' tuition, or they want to save money to buy a home. But it sounds like the need that's driving all other needs, that $1 million need, might be financial stability, for example. So what's pushing it, and how can and then once we figure that out, what ways can, perhaps in the mediation or negotiation, can financial stability be achieved, right? So we're kind of thinking of ways to expand the pie. And so that's really important, because oftentimes, I think that you mentioned, you earlier used the words echo chamber, how sometimes you can feel like, sometimes not just in Austin Powers-ish world, but sometimes it feels like Groundhog's Day, right? And you might be in a situation where you're hearing a lot of conflict, where you're seeing the same types of conflicts, which fall into the same categories. And part of what could be different, and that you could be striving for to kind of use to parse all the noise, is understanding what that $1 million need is. What is it? Yeah, or $1 trillion need, Nikki, to get us there, to help move the conversation forward. And I feel like today, in today's world, where we're seeing just an explosion of conflict in so many different areas, from everything, from the political landscape to the environment. There's so many things happening. Trade. There's so many things happening. Still not getting kind of trapped in the headlines, or what I call the noise, but parsing it to figure out the why. Like, why is this happening? What is the ultimate goal, or the $1 million need? And how can we bring it back to the basics that we all know, to kind of figure out the next steps forward?
Great. And just kind of riffing off the poll, one of the top kind of vote getter on the poll of what's the most difficult is dealing with challenging people. So, and then in addition to that, dealing with a power imbalance. I think a combination of that, a difficult person in a position of power might even be more challenging. What kind of advice do you have on overcoming those kinds of obstacles in a negotiation?
So power imbalances, what's interesting about that is, I feel like, of course, a lot of it depends on where the power balances lie, and if they're real or just perceived, right? So is there any bias in how you're looking at the power imbalance? To me, I often tell people, if we're at the negotiation table, you have some leverage. Even though you might perceive that there's an imbalance, there wouldn't be a dialogue if the other person could just make you do something or make you go away. So the fact that you're both there tells me that you have leverage, and that you may have more power than you perceive you have, right? So I kind of try to demystify some of those immediate associations that there's a power imbalance. I think it also, again, depends on what the power imbalances are, if they're real or perceived, and then asking yourself, what is the best way to move forward in this power imbalance? So if it's a power imbalance that's because we're talking about employer or employee or former employer, how do you level the playing field? I think also, if we're talking about power imbalances in a situation where it's pretty cut, I mean, it's pretty clear what's going on. This is a situation where we're talking about a mediation or a negotiation, where you can have someone who can be a third party to kind of to balance it for you. Oftentimes I find that that's a helpful way to do it. So if you're butting heads or bumping heads, and you're not able to get past those power imbalances, then getting someone to intervene and be the intermediary could help. I think also thinking about how you might be playing into that. So sometimes, for example, we've all been in a situation where maybe there's a negotiation and the other side had more people than you did, or vice versa, and that the optics may be something that could be an issue. And so I have no problem saying, do we need all of these people in the room? right? Who needs to be here? Because it's feeling like there's an imbalance optically, and that could also lend itself to being an imbalance in the negotiations. And I can say I haven't had people take issue with that. Usually you ask the question and then they'll be like, yeah, there are 10 of us and there are only 2 people there, and we don't all need to be here. And so it just depends. Like power imbalances to me, I think there's so many things that go into it. And then you just start again with, is it real, or is it, or are you perceiving it to be an power imbalance? And if it's a perception, then I think, sometimes have to go within and check yourself. One of the great books that I've read um, is on conflict coaching by Dr. Trisha Jones. And shout out, you mentioned, both you and Maria mentioned earlier, Nikki, the New York Peace Institute. Shout out to the New York Peace Institute. I really love being on the board there. I really love being a trainer there. And it was there that I took a training with Dr. Trish Jones. She was a co-author of a book on conflict coaching. And one of the things that she talks about is sort of this Venn diagram of power, identity, and emotion. And, we started this conversation. You asked me a question about authenticity, Nikki. And I talked about, leading with your own identity. And something that I read in Dr. Trish Jones' book talks about identity. And if you're having a conflict around your identity, to ask yourself 2 questions, she said. The first question is, how are you being perceived, right? So how are you being perceived in that moment? And then the second question she said to ask is, how do you want to be perceived? That's because perhaps part of the imbalance is coming from, from that, right? So how are you being perceived? How do you want to be perceived? And if you can reconcile that, that might help with any perception of imbalance that's coming from you.
That's great. And there have been some nice examples of conflict resolution. Somebody ordered your book and got the audio version and was getting a lot of trouble, and said that they would be on a Zoom with the author and got an immediate refund. So there's an example of a negotiation leading up to a class on negotiation.
Oh, no.
And that kind of speaks to sharing information and painting a picture of who you are to somebody that might not know. I want to take a step back, and actually I have a kind of secret agenda with this next question, but it's about how you kind of came up with what you call the foundational 5 elements of negotiation. I love that. And I love we share a lot of similarities. I'm also do some improv, and I'm a yes and kind of girl. I wanted to know what if you could go through what they are, and then also go through a little bit of the process of how you decided to distill all of your knowledge about negotiation into this foundational 5, and how you think that is a helpful way to package it for a wider audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, the first premise is, I think people negotiate every day. So that's the first premise. The second premise is, I think people are better negotiators than they think they are, because oftentimes people think of negotiation as being something that you do in a boardroom, or when you're negotiating for a car, or something where the stakes are high. And I think that we negotiate every day. If someone's in the grocery store and they bump into you with their cart in the back of your heel, and that's happened to all of us, you really quickly think how you're going to interact. What are you going to do? What are you going to say, right? If you're getting ready to call customer service or even for this person who bought the audio version of my book. And by the way, I am the person who reads it. Penguin asked me to
Somebody
record.
else gave you some love about that. They said,
Good,
actually, if you want to just
good.
have your own personal conversation with Damali, she reads the book and does a great job. So
Thank you very much. They gave me the option of having a narrator, or they said, well, or we can have you read it. And I thought, this is an easy negotiation. I would definitely read my own book. And so that was a lot of fun for me. I was like, sure, you want to pay me to read my own book? Let me think about that. Okay, sure, I'll do that. That's fine. Very fun negotiation. And so I think what's important to think about is, one, people negotiate every day. Yeah, I think that 33% number is a little bit low. And 2, people are probably better negotiators than they think. And so part of the reason, to answer your question kind of backwards, that I wanted to distill it into something that, one, you can kind of count out on your hand, is I wanted people to see that if they just think about, if they know these 5 things, then these are the 5 elements of every negotiation, and you're probably having these negotiations. And so the foundational 5 are 5 things that you need to know. You have to know what you want. You have to know what you need. You have to know how to actively listen. You have to know how to communicate, and you have to know when to close. So how many times have you gotten through 1, 2, 3, and 4, but you didn't know when to walk away? You didn't know when to close it. So it's really important that these elements, and to me, listening, actively listening is more important than just communicating, because the tendency that we have as people who communicate is to prepare what we're going to say, but we may not always practice listening. And so part of it, part of the foundational 5 is kind of being intentional and identifying these elements. Because one, if there is an impasse or a breakdown, go back to the basics, go back to the foundation. Where was the issue? Is it because I didn't, or the other person didn't know what they needed? I'm hearing what I know what I want. They know what they want, but where's the breakdown? Is it because I've been talking the whole time and I wasn't listening? Did they say something that that actually spoke to a need, but I just didn't catch it? And should I have walked away already? I don't need to spend 20 hours negotiating something that's only going to yield $50 more to me, right? I need to think about it and know when to close and know when to leave the situation. So I think, to me, like, the foundational 5 has been something that has been very helpful for negotiators, by the way, of all ages, right? You can teach this to a child. You can tell a child, no, these are the 5 things you need to know when you're negotiating. And it's amazing how kids kind of grip on to it, because, again, you can use your hands, you can use your hand, you can use your toes, you can use whatever you can to count to 5, and you can get there with knowing that this is the foundation of negotiations that we're going to build on as I'm giving you more tools in the book. And what I think is really helpful is recognizing, because to me, people always say, okay, so you have the foundational 5. What's hard for people, right? So what do you see as being a barrier? And I think something that people have a hard time doing, especially when they're in conflict, is separating their wants from their needs, which is how I came up with the million dollar need. And then the other challenge is knowing when to close, right? People either push too long or walk away too soon. And I think it's really important to kind of pause, think about it, and then figure out, okay, I'm nailing it on the 1, 2, 3, and 4, but I got to work on when to close, or I'm conflating my needs at once. How can I push more towards focusing on my needs and getting what I need? My children are very good negotiators. I actually regret teaching them how to negotiate. They try to negotiate with me every day. And I marvel at it as a parent. So I'm torn. I'm like, well, that was a really good point. I should probably give them more screen time or give them whatever they're asking for to reward the good behavior. But I am raising some master negotiators over here, so I better look out and watch out, because I know that eventually they're going to be better negotiators than me.
Yeah, that's dangerous to to have smart, savvy kids that know all your moves. In my mind, and there have been some people, and thank you, Juan, for putting up the list. But I just want to say it again about knowing what you want. And for me, I associate these with songs. Like, there's a soundtrack in my mind. For me, that's like an Aretha Franklin respect. Knowing what you need. Maybe Rolling Stones, can't always get what you want, but gotta get what you need. How to actively listen, maybe The Sound of Silence, and clear expression. That one I think is just kind of your favorite song that you get the message to, and then of course, the Gambler, for knowing when to walk away, because I think so many negotiations are, you know the key aspect to closing down is really understanding where you're at, and assessing, again, as you said, the value of what you're negotiating for, and the time and the effort, and where you're at in the process. Um, so we've had some great things. So we've had some great love for moms in the chat about what great negotiators people's mothers were. And again, I think that speaks a little bit to maybe that gap in the people who said that they maybe negotiate 33% of the time. I love the story about when your mother went in and didn't like the summer job that you got as a kid, because it wasn't a fancy desk job in DC. It was like work in the parks or something in the sweltering summer. And she went and knew what she wanted and sat down and negotiated, and you got position where you were able to take a course and really kind of set your career path on a whole trajectory that brings you to where you are today. So I think that the stories I really love in this book because they're relatable, and I think that they help, they help us get to know you better, and they also help us to see in ourselves and in our families, in our environments and communities, who's doing what, and where the negotiation skills are actually shining, although they might not be called such. Um, I, I kind of want to talk about maybe imposter syndrome, or people that struggle with self-doubt when you're at the negotiation table. How do you overcome that when you're trying to advocate for yourself? Because in the example I just used, sometimes it's a lot easier to negotiate for other people as an advocate or as a parent or a sibling. It feels natural. But when it comes to advocating for yourself, for that pay raise, for that car price that you want, how can you not feel like an imposter?
I love that question, because I really think that it comes down to a few things. And we talked a little bit about imposter syndrome before, but from the perspective of it being something that could be a barrier, right? And so I think to kind of counter that, one, knowledge is power, right? So you have to leverage your expertise. Come prepared. If you're prepared, then no one can take that from you. They can't take away what you know, right? So you're leveraging your expertise. Two, you have to control the frame. Don't let people dictate the narrative. You control the narrative. You reshape the discussion around your strengths. And I talk about this in the book about knowing your superpowers, and also kind of being able to reframe the way that people are seeing you. So if you can identify that there's a bias, it's hilarious. I talk about in the book me trying to negotiate for a car. And I've had, even since the book was published, and I wrote this book a few years ago, I've had another car situation where someone asked my husband about the car, and he was like, "You need to talk to my wife. It's her car." And I'm just like, "What is it?" So, and so there are different ways that you can use that, right? One, I could be annoyed and be just like, I'm standing right here, or hey, like you could see me, or I can just control the narrative and basically say, oh yeah, I came here because I want X car. I have this one already, and let's talk about it. So they can see that I'm knowledgeable about the vehicle, and boom, they will forget that they potentially messed up, and I will move on because I don't like things like that. Oftentimes, as negotiators, or even in a mediation, no one's perfect, right? There's something that could happen that could come up, and that thing, whatever that issue is, has the potential to trip you up, right? And sometimes we get stuck in it. I mean, it happens to all of us where we might be feeling as if, oh man, I wish I didn't say that. And instead of moving forward, you're focusing on whatever just happened, or wishing you hadn't said or done whatever it was. First of all, many people are probably feeling that way in the moment, not just you. Maybe they're not saying it, but they may be like, oh, why did I say that? That wasn't the best thing to say. And then second, you got to move on. Like, again, control the narrative, control the frame, figure out how you can reshape it if it's possible to inject some humor into it. I was on the news. I'll be on the news tomorrow, and part of what I'm talking about is how to use humor. I mean, mentioned this a moment ago, but so for example, if you trip while you're walking into a room or walking on the stage, you could kind of like hide away and shrink in embarrassment, or you can say, now that's the way you make an entrance, right? And so for me, it's like if you control the frame, then you kind of reshape how people even saw you trip, by just getting up and keep moving. And then the last thing I'll say, and this kind of speaks to a question that I saw in the chat, from Tara, is, and this goes back to the power imbalances question, is that and I think what I'm talking about now, can also be the same answers for power imbalance. Do people who speak the loudest and talk the most get what they want? I don't think that's the case. I think sometimes people talk a lot and they are saying nothing, right? Nothing of value. That's not always the case that they're talking a lot and dominating the conversation. I think that another tip is strategic silence, right? Pausing and being quiet can shift the power and make others feel the silence. And so strategic silence is important, because oftentimes people will give you information that you need, to use in the negotiation, in the mediation, in the arbitration, what have you, in the discussion, right? I know that we have a community of conflict resolvers here, just based on the polls and seeing that they check different boxes. But again, at its core, this is just about daily conversations you're having with people, whether you're working in the field as a dispute resolver or you're just having daily interactions with other people, or yourself. Conversations, daily conversations with yourself.
I'm going to launch a little poll on people's experience with authenticity and how often they feel pressure to change that in the face of a difficult negotiation. And I wanted to ask you, just since we do have a lot of mediators, a lot of arbitrators, a lot of litigators always in the room, and also a lot of people who play the role of a third party neutral, where staying unbiased and fair is not just part of the job, it is the job, and can really go awry if you're perceived as something other than that. So I wanted to ask about what your tips and tools and experience is being authentic in that kind of a context when being unbiased is so important and part of the job.
Yeah, so I mean, for all the dispute resolution professionals in the room, we're trained to be neutral, but neutrality doesn't mean invisibility, right? We all show up as a neutral, coming from with different experiences, different exposure, different expertise, coming from different environments into different environments. And so for us, I mean, yes, we're neutrals, but we are not invisible. And you can bring all of that. You can bring your experience, expertise, and national negotiation strengths into the process without compromising your neutrality and without compromising fairness. And so I think the way that I would answer your question is um, to point out, to highlight some strategies that maybe we already use, or maybe that we are not thinking about it because we just do it naturally, or to give some strategies to people who are like, how can I do this more frequently? Like I like when I can, but I don't feel like I control when I'm showing up this way. So how can I be more intentional about it? And so I would say leading into the process expertise, the process. Oftentimes people are coming to a dispute. It might be the first dispute they're having with this other person. It may be an ongoing dispute. It may be the first time they're interacting with you as a mediator. They could have counsel. Could be the first time you're interacting with counsel. There are always, in my opinion, so many, many, MINI, negotiations happening, right? There's so many. And I think it's important to first just remember, lean into the process expertise. You know how to navigate or manage the process. And because that's power. That's a tool for you that gives you power. I would then say using active listening as a strength. It's so important. And I think I can't stress it enough because so much information is gleaned from listening to people. And I know it sounds so simple because, people will say, I think my grandfather used to say something that I think a lot of grandparents said, you have two ears and one mouth, like something like that. So, you're supposed to be listening. People aren't listening. There are many reasons that people don't listen. They don't listen because they're thinking about and then let me not say they. There are many reasons that we don't listen, right? I'll put myself in this too. We don't listen because we're thinking about what we're going to say next. We don't listen because we don't like what we're hearing. And if we're being honest, we don't listen because we don't like the person who's talking. We don't like that person. So it doesn't matter how reasonable they're being. It doesn't matter if they're saying something that maybe theoretically we agree with, what we don't like them. So it doesn't matter what they say. I used to watch some cartoon when I was a kid. Maybe it was Peanuts, and they would just go, "Meow, meow, meow," something like that. And sometimes that's how you hear the person speaking when you don't like them. You don't actually hear the point. And so, and I think it's really important is if you use active listening as a strength, then you think about how you're going to frame your questions, summarize the discussions. We're going back to the basics that mediators know, that neutrals know, that arbitrators know, people in the dispute resolution community, we all know this. And then thinking about how we can use the process to influence, I won't say the word influence, but shape the way that people see the dispute, right? So people who are entrenched in it, how can we move them out of it? And then I think if you notice that there are power imbalances, and I think this keeps coming up because it's something that can lead to impasse. And I feel like when we get to these walls, these barriers, what do we do, right? Like, how do we navigate through these barriers? Naming the power dynamics, right? Without taking sides, maintaining your neutrality. So acknowledging the imbalances can sometimes ensure that people have an equal opportunity to participate. Also, you have so many techniques and tools available to you. If people are together, you can separate them and you can shuttle. There's so many things you can do to really move a conversation along.
That's great. I think I might have been a radio DJ in a past life because I tend to hate silence, but I also recognize that silence is often one of the most powerful tools in a negotiation, right? And especially it can emphasize when one party, if you're in a caucus situation, which I know is not all the time, but can really emphasize what two people in dispute have said. It gives the opportunity for the other person to hear what might have just been said with some kind of underline bold italics.
You,
So
you
I,
know,
I
Nikki, what I'll say there is not just that, what I love about that, and you're absolutely right, it can underline with, bold and italics. And I think it's important to insert here that cross-cultural communication is real, right? And so knowing and understanding how different cultures communicate, writing a book wasn't just me writing all my ideas. Penguin required me to research and heavily research. They didn't just want to hear what I thought. They wanted to know, what did the data say? And so understanding how different cultures communicate, there's a lot of information on that that's been written, several studies across the world on how people communicate and being aware. So when I talk about being prepared, prepared isn't just reading the documents, prepared isn't just understanding the dynamics or the law or the issue in conflict. Prepared is knowing that if you negotiate, if you're having a negotiation in Nairobi, there's a tea time in the morning, so you can't just power through from 8 a.m. to noon. You have to know that there's a morning tea time that you have to observe, or everybody's going to be mad at you. They don't care if you're the best mediator in the world, but you have to know, you have to understand the culture, and you have to understand cross-cultural communication. And so it's also incumbent upon people who are thinking about, well, I want to be authentic. Part of authenticity is also taking a moment to show who you are, but also to understand the people who are in front of you and to have an understanding of cultural dynamics and to bring up your cultural competence as a provider. I think that's really important. I think that's important for a variety of reasons. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure I said that while you were talking about that before you moved on to the next point.
No, absolutely. And I just wanted to report back on the authenticity poll, where it's kind of a bell curve that most people in the virtual room here don't feel like they often or only a few feel frequently that they have to feel pressure to change their negotiation style. But I don't know. I think that depends a lot. I think that's interesting information. If you are asking this question to a lot of the audiences you speak to, I'd be curious. And I think that just also circles back a little bit to say that, the book, and this is not just a promo of the book, but there's a lot of research there, and the footnotes are rich, as every kind of former legal writer should have, and it's a trove of receipts for what you're saying. The way that you say things can often be conversational and off the cuff and funny and accessible. But I think that the underlying value and the work that's gone into it is also there. So for me, it's the best of all worlds. It doesn't have to be dry and boring and impossible to get through to be really meaningful and true and supported. So I think that's really great. And I also think that's something that we're always saying, if only somebody could speak to the masses. So from your book to Taylor Swift's lyrics, let's get this on the bigger stage where possible. You spoke a little bit about different cultures. Could you share a story maybe where you were kind of challenged with respecting cultural differences, and you used the tactics that you describe in your book to overcome that?
Certainly. I mean, I definitely don't profess to be a person who doesn't get into trouble. I certainly can get into trouble and not be aware of it. I mentioned earlier that I'm from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a melting pot of different cultures and a place where, we have different cuisines, right? And the way that I grew up learning about different places, like my mom would say, "Hey, what do you want to have for dinner tonight?" And she would just name the cuisine, right? So she would say, "Do you want to have Ethiopian? Do you want to have X or Y?" So that's how I was raised,
I
thinking,
always want Ethiopian in
it's
DC.
the best food. I mean, I
Miss
love
that.
injera. I miss it so much. And that's one of the, I mean, we have so many wonderful restaurants in DC. So I grew up thinking that was the norm, right? And I think there are a lot of things because part of what I talked about that makes us who we are comes from your environment, your exposure, your education, things of that nature. And so one issue that happened, something that happened to me that I will share, is that I was invited to India to speak at a few, to Ahmedabad to speak at a few different universities, talking about negotiations, talking about negotiating across differences. And I was so happy to be there. I was so excited. And literally, I was being taken to different universities, from maritime universities, just different subject matter universities. And I was just thrilled. And there was a point in the day where the guide who was with me had invited me to lunch with the university that, like, maybe it was the president of the university or whoever was in charge of the program. There were probably 5 or 6 of us, and we were eating. And I was trying to say, I mean, my intent was to say something like nice and complimentary. So my intent was to say, like, I'm really enjoying this food. But what I said was, "Oh, I really love Indian food." And there was this moment where everyone was quiet and no one said anything. And I was just trying to, this like, I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, "What happened? Like, what just happened?" So later I asked my guide and I was like, "Hey, did something, what happened?" Like, there was a moment where I was trying to give a compliment and people were quiet for a moment and I didn't know what happened. And he said, "Well, Damali, I remember that moment. It was because you said, 'I like Indian food.'" And I was like, I actually said, I think I said, "I love Indian food." And he said, "You said, 'I love Indian food.'" And I was like, still not getting it. It's like, "Well, I do love Indian food." And he was like, "But it's not Indian food to us, it's just food." And I was like, "Oh my God, what a stupid thing to say," right? Like, I just felt so silly, right? And so what I learned from that, and I said the same thing to him that I said to you, which is, I'm so sorry. Like, I wasn't trying to be offensive. I grew up and my mom would say, "Do you want this type of food, that type of food?" And she would either make it or we would go to get it. And I said, that was on me, for not kind of recognizing that that was not going to come across in the way that would be, that the impact of what happened, of what I said, would be taken that way. And so that was a learning moment for me, that even in trying to be complimentary, you could still get it wrong. And so just thinking about what you're going to say before you say it, and also when you get it wrong, I'm a big fan of apologies. Something that when I was coming up in law school and negotiating, the model often said, "Don't apologize," right? That shows weakness, that shows, and that to me is a very, I want to choose my words, but I'll say it this way. That wasn't my style, right? My style is, if I am incorrect about something, if I'm wrong about something, I want to make it right. I don't want to just act like it didn't happen. I want to kind of, let's talk about it. And maybe that doesn't apply to every situation, but I'm just saying, like, that generally that's my style. And so I was very apologetic. I apologized. And yeah, I was like, "Do I need to go back and tell them?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Okay, phew." But I never made that mistake again. So
Oops, I'm sorry. Big
that's
mistake.
fine.
I muted you by accident. Just the power of silence. That was not intentional. So this is not necessarily a segue, but how do you recover from a big faux pas? How
Mm.
do you recover from saying something that you don't intend, that might be insulting, or there was a story in the book that I really loved about an assumption, or we work with our own biases, and we might say something, just like you said, for your meal, that you didn't think was at all derogatory, but it really offended. How in a negotiation do you recover from a big faux pas?
I think if you are aware of it, so part of it is awareness. If you're aware of it, I think if you have a time, so okay, a couple things. One, I think you have to do some real time like assessing and figure out, is that something that's going to be problematic, right? So it's like really quick in your mind. You have to be like, oh, did everyone pause? Did everyone stop breathing? Did everyone stop chewing if you're at lunch? Like looking and taking stock of what the impact of what it was. And even if you can't identify, because in the scenario that I mentioned, like what I said, I thought was complimentary. So I knew at that moment that there was something that happened. So in my book, I talk about micro expressions and being able to read people's micro expressions. It may be a second, but if you caught it, you need to lean into it because it could be a few different things happening. It could be something that you said or did that you were unaware of. And it might be helpful to just pause and say, what just happened? Like something happened, the energy changed, something happened. Can someone tell me? It could be something unrelated to you. Maybe there's something else going on in someone's mind, and at that moment they're like, and that's because they left the stove on, or they have to go put some money on the meter, or whatever the case is. So it may not be about you, but I think it's important to recognize those micro expressions. So the awareness of the moment is key. And I talk about this in more detail in the book. And then I think recovering from it, sometimes you may have to apologize. Sometimes it depends. You have to read the room. So is it an opportunity to say something humorous, right? Is it an opportunity to kind of lighten the mood if it was something that was, perceived that was heavy? It's an opportunity to do the proverbial falling on your sword, right? So it just depends. Something that I like to be consistent with is that there is no one size fits all approach. There just isn't. And for people who tell you this is the way that you do it every time, I mean, how is that giving you the opportunity to make a decision and use your own judgment as to what you should do next? And so when I'm teaching, law students, when I'm teaching around the world, I always say, I'm not trying to have Damali minions out there all doing what I would do if something happened. You should do what you would do. Is if what you would do if you said something that was you committed a faux pas, and if you would say something self-deprecating, or if you would say something humorous, or if you would say I'm sorry, or if you would say like, can we start over, which is something that I like to say. Can we start over? I am a big fan of resetting. I reset with my children. I reset conversations because you can hear when something gets off on the wrong start. You can hear it, you can see it. And sometimes what people do, which is you miss an opportunity to fix it in the moment, and then you may learn 5 days later, 5 minutes later, 5 months later, 5 years later, that the person is still stuck on whatever that was, and you've moved on because you didn't think it was a big deal. But if you know about it, you're aware of it, and you can address it in the moment, try to. If someone brings it up to you at a later point in time, if it must be important to them, right? Even though it may be something that, may not be top of mind for you. So actively listen to see what it is they need. They need you to acknowledge the moment. This is not just for corporate negotiations. This is for daily human communication, right? What does the person need? And are you willing to meet their need in that moment? I'm not saying you have to give people what they need all the time, but I think if relationships are important to you, I think if it depends on what's happening, you may want to consider if you can understand what their need is, seeing if it's something that you can address.
So as you were saying that, I just wanted to launch a poll to get some feedback on wants versus needs, because you mentioned it. But I think the more interesting part of your response was what you can do as an advocate of a negotiator if that faux pas happened between or among parties that you're helping to resolve a dispute. And I thought that was a really interesting portion of the book. And I think it echoes what some people have been saying, and it falls on, how authentic and how strong your relationship is, and the great kind of fact finding and active listening activities you can do to try and kind of pinpoint where the false step was, and kind of lay that over your knowledge of the parties and what their wants and needs and positions are, and figure out how to get it back to a point where you're back on track and you can reset. So I thought that was really great. This kind of we're going to switch into a question about superpowers, but I think we've all seen enough Marvel series to know that superheroes are not always perfect. And so part of a superpower can be, understanding how to recover from a really big mistake. So just closing on that, I do want to ask you, how can we discover what our superpowers are? How do we know? Is it X-ray vision? How do you discover it? And then how do you kind of turn those traits into something that can be great?
I love that, Nikki. Is it X-ray vision? That's awesome. I think first, ask yourself, what do you do well? What do you believe you do well? I ask this question a lot when I'm speaking in different settings. I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I ask people, what do you believe you do well? First question. Second question, what has someone told you you do well? Because sometimes how people see us could differ from the way that you see yourself. So what has someone told you that you do well? And then how about this? What is something that you don't think you do well? And what is something that someone told you that you don't do well? I asked those four questions because first, one, you might think and that you're an amazing communicator. Excellent. If you can, and maybe you think you're the best, you're better at writing. So if that is your preferred style and you know you're good at it, if you're in a situation where you're having a verbal oral conversation and you want to be able to switch to your superpower, just say, hey, I really want to keep this conversation going. If possible, let's just, let's switch to the computer, or I'll get back to you on the computer, or I'll get something like that. So that gives you a chance to kind of get into your superpower. Or maybe you can say, well, if I were writing this, so you can put yourself in that mindset. If I were writing this, what would I say? Sometimes people prefer writing because they can think about it, they can spend more time on it. Second question, asking you what someone else has told you you're good at. That's interesting because remember, part of communicating is communicating to your audience's needs. And if someone is telling you, I think you're really patient. I love how patient you are. And you might think that you're not a patient person, but you're being perceived as patient. So that is a superpower that you have. And then when I go into sort of the negative side of it, meaning what do you think you're not good at, or what has someone told you you're not good at? I think that's really important because oftentimes, we kind of, if we know we're good at something, we try to do that more, right? So if I know I'm good at doing, if I'm good at cooking this one dish, I'm going to cook that all the time. It's just to give like a basic example. But if you think you're bad at something, you're going to avoid it. You're going to tend to avoid it. And the question is, how can we expand our toolkits, right? So how can you do that? Well, one, it's seeing a negative as a positive. It's reframing the way you see that negative. So for example, if you think that, well, I'm not really a good listener. Well, in what situations are you a good listener? Maybe you're not a good listener when you're talking to someone or you're listening to something that you don't like, but maybe when it's something that you actually care about, you're an excellent listener, right? So how can you put yourself in that mindset so that you can be a good listener for whatever the situation is? And then the last question, what has someone told you that you're bad at? Right? Because maybe there's a space for that too. My grandfather used to tell me that I talk too much, and now I get paid to talk all the time. So the point is reframing a negative to a positive and trying to expand your toolkit by also recognizing that things that you may have considered to be negative could actually be positive and utilized in a positive way.
I love that. And I think that so many people's arcs, so many really successful people have been set upon their path and their journey because somebody told them they couldn't or they weren't good at something. And I think there's that little bit of a rebellious streak in some of us that want to say, well, you know what? You're not only wrong, you're way wrong. I can do it, and I can do it better than almost anybody in the world. So I think that there's a lot of psychology that can play into the superpower analysis. I'm gonna just put up a little poll to see what our audience thinks is their superpower. And I want to kind of pivot to bias and also to a little bit the title of the book and to the audience that you intended for the book. Because I've been walking around Paris, sitting in cafes with this book, and people actually have been coming up to me and asking me what I'm reading, what it's about. And I love that because I'm a really open and curious and friendly kind of a person. And so it's been a really great door for me to promote you. You're very popular in Paris cafe scene right now. Um, but also to say why I'm not negotiating while Black and never will be, but I am an advocate and a supporter and an ally, and why is this book, who is this book for? Why is it also for somebody like me? And also, why was it important for you to have that title? Because I know that you sometimes can struggle with publishing houses wanting a specific title. It's a controversial title. It's a in your face kind of a title. So I'd love for you to. I know that was a very compound question, but I'd love for you to address that a little bit.
Certainly. So let's start with something that's just basic, right? Which is bias, right? This is if you see the word Black on a book, do you think you have to be Black to read the book? It's a very interesting question. I have the two books, right? Same book. One is Be Who You Are to Get What You Want. My UK publisher published this version. And my American publisher published this book. And so same book, two different titles. And so part of it is how people perceive the old adage, can you judge a book by its cover? Can you? Because there are people who think, well, can I read this book if I'm not Black? Of course you can. If you can read, you can read this book. This book is for anyone who wants to improve their negotiating skills. It's for anyone who has ever been underestimated. It's for anyone who wants to basically who's read other books and didn't feel seen or heard in those books and wanted to find a way to really have a way to improve their negotiation skills and to have a real life toolkit that you can dip into and use your judgment as to how to apply those tools. And so what's interesting about my title, and you asked about the publishers, my book went to auction. For what that means is that several buyers wanted to buy the book. And so it went to auction and it went to auction. This is my original title. This is my original subtitle. This is my original subtitle. And I say that to say, oftentimes when you go to a publisher, they do want to buy the content, but they oftentimes want you to change the title. I had to negotiate different aspects of my book, right? And I had to negotiate to maintain this original title. Number one, in the category of negotiation books were usually giving you a promise, right? They're telling you you can do this, you can get to yes, you can get past no, you're telling you never split the difference, all these types of things. So one, I was part of what I was going up against was this notion that you had to do things a certain way to get what you want, and that the outcome that this result-based outcome was based on following this exact approach. So that was part of it. Two, I wanted a provocative title that really suited me. I'm fun. I'm straightforward, and I can be a little bit provocative in terms of like what I say. Right, I'm on the edge. I'm using my improv skills to kind of see where the borders are. Looking at people's faces, trying to see, okay, how funny can I be? Right, what can I say? How am I going to keep people engaged? And so this is my original title. I wanted a few things to happen. I wanted people who didn't see themselves to know, didn't see themselves in prior books to know, I wrote this book for you. I wrote this book for you. If you check a box, I wrote this book for you. I wanted people who recognize that there is bias in just seeing the word Black to be like, if you are an ally, if it said woman, you should still read it if you're a man. If it says Black and you're not Black, you should still read it because that's the bias. That's the implicit bias that I'm in your face challenging you about to see if you feel comfortable reading this book. And then the other part of it was just making sure that if you didn't see yourself in this title, Negotiating While Black, you saw yourself in the subtitle, Be Who You Are to Get What You Want, or you saw yourself in the subtitle, A New Way to Negotiate for Anyone Who's Been Underestimated. So there are many points of reference that you as an individual who likes to read good books can say, oh, well, I've been underestimated. I can read this. So what if I'm not Black? Or yeah, I'm Black. And you know what? I feel like this book is going to speak to my experiences, which I haven't seen captured in the literature. So I think it's really important, especially in today's world, as we are seeing a lot of DEI backlash and all these types of things, to recognize that part of what it really is thinking about how to have more voices talking about their experiences, how people can see themselves in the literature, and also recognizing that you can't judge a book by its cover. And at the same time, you might learn something if you just put aside maybe an implicit bias that you have with respect to seeing a book with this title. Someone asked me to put both books up. These are the books. They're both available. They're all electronic version. They're in everything. Audible, Kindle, Amazon, your local bookstores. Part of what I like to do for fun is, and I'm in an airport, going to the airport bookstore, and I tell you, I will do a happy dance every time I go to an airport bookstore or to a bookstore and I see my book there. It's just like, one, wow, I wrote this book and it's out there, and two, wow, it's in the airport. And if don't let anyone be standing next to me, because I'll be like, I see you're looking for a new book to read. I think you should be renegotiating while Black. And I don't care what boxes they check visibly, I'm going to suggest that they read my book every time. And usually those negotiations go my way.
All right, I'm going to ask you to hold up the books again because I shared the poll results while you were holding up the books. So there she is, holding them up, and double bravo for that. I'm gonna launch another. I don't know. I popped up the superpowers, and everybody's kind of there's a good mix of superpowers amongst everybody. Quite a few. So that's nice to have a great options, right? And I think that a lot of us work in teams. And people are popping in that they're finding the book as we're going along. Um, I guess I kind of want to open the floor to other people other than me. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you, if people could just take away one idea from your book, what would you like it to be?
I would say that you do not have to change who you are to be successful in negotiations. You do not have to change who you are to be successful in negotiations. You just need to understand your superpowers, how to communicate effectively, and negotiate with confidence. To me, the best negotiators do not imitate other people. They use their own voice, their style, and their value.
Amazing. Again, it just reminds me of being a virtuoso in anything, right? You know all the skills, you know the foundational information, but where you really shine and where people really appreciate you is for that unique value add that you bring to the table. And you do it in spades and just beautifully so. So I wanted to thank you for that. So as we open up the floor for maybe live questions, if anybody has the courage to ask live, I'm going to pop up a few additional polls so that we can you know generate some more data. But I really want to thank you so much, and also, you know maybe ask, as nobody's jumping in, but maybe just ask in the context of where we are today and what's going on with the kind of efforts to kind of roll back DEI, with a lot of the political contentiousness. Where do you see, the tactics that you describe helping, and what do you think your role is as we move into this new era of contentious kind of conflict?
That's a big question, Nikki.
Or what do you hope people can kind of distill and take from this to maybe help them get through the challenges that we're seeing?
Okay, so what I would say is, one, I think it's really important to parse out misinformation and disinformation, because I think that, one, what we're learning and what the research is showing is that people are getting their news and information from specific sources. So for example, and I'm not trying to put a whole group of people together, but just say like certain generations, they are getting their information from social media. That's their go-to. That's where they're getting it from first, right? As opposed to traditional media or print media. And so if it's coming from there, it's so saturated with so many different voices. And depending on who you follow or whose information you're getting, you could be getting misinformation or, so that I think that's really important is to be able to do that. I think communication is key. So how information is being communicated. So for example, to get to that same category, if we're talking about reaching more people with information, with accurate information, how that information is communicated. Gone are the days that you could just put an ad in the paper or it'll be on your local news. You have people who have different communication preferences. And so I think it's really important to meet people where they are. So how do we reach, the young people? How do we reach people who traditionally only watch the 10 o'clock news? How do we reach more people with information? So I think that's important. I think when you're talking specifically about anti-DEI, and this whole backlash there, I think it really comes down to we have to reinvent. Throughout history, words have been used in different ways, right? I think when it comes to this, if now the pariah is DEI, how do we still get what we need? How do we still do that, but not having the focus lost on the terminology, right? So this is a great way to wrap it up when talking about wants and needs, right? How do we still make sure that we have diverse voices without being politicized? Because a lot of things are being politicized. How do we have people who understand, who have the same values come together without it just falling upon, perhaps political or party lines, right? So there are it's not that dissimilar from what you see if you're a dispute resolver, right? It's just a different topic. And so how do we use the foundation of what we all know as conflict resolvers and apply it to something that's not just in a nice little mediation brief or outside of a courtroom or it's not just sort of in a nice little package, but it's broad and pervasive and it's happening around us at a rapid pace. So how do we slow things down? And how do we sort of use these skills that we've learned to apply to our jobs to life? So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a big question, and
It's a big question.
I'm trying to be careful not to, I'm trying to
Well,
be neutral in my in my
it's a
response.
big question and it's a charged question, but I ask difficult questions.
Hey,
So
hey, Nikki.
yeah. Do you have a question?
Yes, this is Juan Walker. Well, first
Go
of all,
ahead.
Damali, this has been a treat. I mean, really, this has been great. I was thinking about writing a book myself. I'm a mediator, professor. I teach negotiation at Stanford and Georgetown, and I want to do this very topic. And so I did a survey of literature. Yours popped up, and I listened to your audiobook all summer, and I read the book as well. And I was like, I guess I don't have anything more to add, so I won't write a book after all. So it's been great.
Juan, write something.
But my question is, you can be more authentic. I find I became more authentic, more mature. The older I got, the more confident I got because I've been doing this forever, right? And I'm wondering, as I teach my students, you should be yourself, be authentic. How can we accelerate that process for them because they don't have enough confidence to know that this is right, this is wrong. So what's your suggestion in that way?
Oh, I love that question. And I hear that a lot. How can I be confident if I'm young or if I'm new to the profession or I want to respect, the people's experiences, but I also have something to add to the dialogue. And I think, I mentioned I'm going to be on the news tomorrow, and part of what I'm talking about is how to be confident without being cocky. I think that that's sometimes what happens, right? Is that confidence doesn't always, it might not land the way the person intends for it to land. So I think one, knowing what you know, many of us have been in a situation where we were the most junior person on a team. But we added value because whatever work they gave us to do, we did to the best of our ability. Whatever we knew how to do, we did it. So if it was doc review, or if it was writing the first draft of a brief, or whatever it was, we did it to the best of our ability. And what I tell young people is you have something to add, but people need to know what you can do. When I was a junior associate, when I was a summer associate, I was new. I was in law school, but I also spoke different languages. People didn't know that. So I could do something that people couldn't do, even though they were more senior than me. And when I told them I can do it, then I started to get better assignments, because now I'm doing doc review in a basement in Mexico as opposed to somewhere else, right? So now I get to go to Mexico and I get to do this, all because I did tell them what I could do. So I think it's important for young people to know you are bringing talents to the table. Share them. What was your summer job? Where did where do you do community service? There's always something that you can add to the dialogue, but oftentimes people don't know. And if you don't share that, they're just going to see you as this junior person. So I think it's important for the confidence to come from what you bring to the table and sharing that in a way that you show your value.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I want to
Hi,
give
Damali.
yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry, I saw your message.
Yeah.
Hi, Damali, Nadia Shahjahani here. Thank you so much. I'm still in the process of reading your book. It's on my nightstand, but I just wanted to ask, and I don't know that in the 1 minute we have, if we can answer this, but in dealing with a lot of the anti-diversity stuff that's happening, as a neutral, I guess maybe I'm answering my own question as I'm talking about it, but how do you move past the emotions that I feel when I'm confronted with the wrong, illegality, misinformation, disinformation, that really feels like it's tearing down a lot of the work that we've progressed forward, and now we're going backwards.
I think that we're going to have to have a lot of patience. I think that you're right. It seems like there have been many years of working towards a goal, and then it seems like a lot of it's kind of just being, I want to say obliterated, but essentially being stripped of some of those things that we've been working towards. I think part of it is you know what you know, so sharing that information and talking about it. Everyone brings a different expertise to the table. Something that I've been talking about when I was a junior associate, a lot of the work I did for pro bono work was in the immigration space, and just seeing how things have changed. And so what I try to do is to combat the emotional side of things, is grounding people in objective criteria. The laws say what the laws say. This is, period. No matter what people think, how they are interpreting it, this is what the law says. This is what the rules is. There's something objective that we can point to, right? Everybody knows today is Thursday, at least in the US right now, it's Thursday, right? That's something that can ground us. And do we all agree with this? So what I find is it depends on the dialogue or the discourse in general, but I try to see, okay, what can we agree to? And is there something objective that we can point to, some objective criteria that we can point to, that we can focus on that, so that we can kind of put the emotions to the side and then figure out where we can take this dialogue. And of course, we don't have to agree, but we can agree on that some things are impacting people in a disproportionate way, right? Can we acknowledge that? So again, what can we agree on in general? That was just an example. What can we agree on, and how can we both or all move away from the emotional aspect of it? I don't think it's important to acknowledge emotions, by the way. I feel like some people were taught, to have a poker face and to not show any emotions. And I think that for me, that's not authentic to me. If someone tells me something that is objectively, something that I would have a reaction to, I have a very expressive face. I'm not going to have a poker face, especially if we're one-on-one and I don't have to worry so much about my face being neutral. If someone says something that's sad, I'm going to say, that sounds like it was very hard for you, or I'm going to lean into it and acknowledge the emotions. Sometimes to even get to the space where we can have a dialogue that's productive, you have to acknowledge someone's feelings about what they're saying. So it just depends. Again, there's no one size fits all approach, but I think it just depends. It's good to see you, Nadia.
Thank you so much. We're at the the New York 10 o'clock bewitching hour now. So I wanted to wrap up the official program just again with a huge thank you, Damali. I know you are very hard to book, and this book is one of the reasons why. It's just a fabulous resource, and I think it really speaks to the many programs and you know, times that you've taught, and it's just a culmination of everything that you've spent years and years learning and putting together, and just learning about yourself as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you for taking the time to share with us. Maria, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we can stop the recording. And I don't know, Damali, if you can stay around for 5 minutes if there's additional questions. If not, I know people have to run or maybe snowshoe away. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us and encourage you to join us again next month. Maria, do you want to have the final word?
Yes, thank you so much. I want to echo all of Nikki's thanks, and thank you, Nikki, for engaging Damali in a truly amazing conversation. This has been wonderful, and as you can see from the chat, you're getting loads and loads of praise, Damali. Look forward to seeing all that you do in the future as well. I've known Damali now forever and have seen her career flourish. It's so great to have had you here. And you should know that it probably took us almost 2 years to book Damali. We went back and forth for the last 2 years trying to get to today, and it was worth it. Thank you again. And Nikki, if you can turn off the recording, we are now going to be in an informal chat for just a few minutes for those of you who'd like to hang around.